The town was small and quiet, with a few streets lined with old wooden buildings and dusty paths, where people walked slowly and nodded to each other. Life moved at a gentle pace, but for some, the calm was only skin deep. She lived in one of the houses at the edge of town, a modest home with a small garden and a porch that looked out over the fields. From the outside it seemed peaceful and simple, but inside the walls were heavy with tension. Her husband had always been quick to anger, and the last months had made it worse. Small things could set him off, and when that happened, she would feel a chill in her chest. That never went away. Every morning she would rise before the sun and move quietly so as not to wake him. She would water the garden, sweep the porch, and prepare breakfast in silence. The neighbors saw her every day and greeted her warmly, but they did not know the full weight of her life. She learned to smile even when her heart was heavy, and to speak softly even when she wanted to shout. She had grown careful with every step, careful with every word, careful with every glance. Even walking through the town, she felt eyes on her, and she knew some were full of pity while others were full of curiosity. She tried not to notice and kept her own rhythm slow and measured. The cowboy lived on the outskirts of town in a large house with wide doors and a barn full of horses. He was a man of great size and strength, but he spoke little and moved with a calm that made people feel safe in his presence. Children would sometimes run to see him, and adults would nod respectfully, but he rarely ventured into the town center. He preferred to watch from a distance and to do things in his own time. People knew that if trouble came, he would step in quietly and decisively, but he did not seek it out. His eyes were sharp, and he noticed everything, but he never made unnecessary noise or fuss. One afternoon, as she walked past the edge of the fields carrying a basket of vegetables, she saw him standing by the fence, watching his horses. There was something in the way he held himself that made her pause. His presence was large but gentle, and she felt a strange sense of calm, even though her heart was still heavy. She nodded to him, and he nodded back in the quiet way he always did. There was no conversation, and yet something spoken passed between them. Back at her house, she moved through the rooms, slowly arranging the few items she had. She avoided making too much noise and tried to plan her day around avoiding conflict. Her husband was unpredictable, and she never knew when a simple word might spark his anger. She remembered times when he had shouted over minor mistakes or slammed doors over imagined slights. She learned to anticipate his moods and to act in ways that kept him calm. The tension never left completely, but she learned to live with it each day. The town itself seemed unaware of her suffering. Children played in the dusty streets, and the shopkeepers greeted each other cheerfully. The air smelled of hay and dust, and sometimes the faint smoke of cooking fires. Birds called from the trees, and the wind moved through the streets carrying small pieces of news from one neighbor to another. Life went on for everyone else, but for her each day felt like balancing on a tightrope. She often looked out from her porch at the horizon and wondered if there was a way to change her life. She thought about leaving, but the fear of what might happen if she tried to escape held her back. Every option seemed dangerous, and she felt trapped by the very walls that were meant to protect her. At the same time, she could not ignore the desire to be free to breathe without fear, to move without watching every step, and to speak without measuring each word. One evening, she saw the cowboy again as she returned from the town. He was tending to one of the horses, and he looked up when she passed. Their eyes met for a moment, and she felt a strange warmth. It was not romantic, it was a feeling of safety, a sense that someone saw her without judgment and without threat. She did not stop, but she carried that feeling with her as she walked up the path to her house. Inside the house, she felt the tension waiting for her. Her husband was in his usual chair, looking at the fire. He spoke little, but the air carried the weight of his temper. She moved carefully, placing a kettle on the stove and stirring the contents slowly. Every sound she made was calculated to avoid drawing attention, and every glance was measured to avoid upsetting him. She remembered the warmth of the field and the quiet presence of the cowboy, and held on to that feeling as a small shield against the fear that waited for her inside. That night she lay awake thinking about the small glimpses of calm she had found in the day. She thought about the strength it must take to live quietly and to choose kindness even when surrounded by fear. She thought about the cowboy and how he moved through the world carrying his power, but using it only when necessary. She wondered if anyone could live with such calmness, and thought maybe one day she would learn to find her own quiet strength. The house creaked in the wind, whispered through the cracks in the walls. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a life beyond fear. In her mind, she walked through the town with her head held high, moving freely without watching every step. She imagined feeling the sun on her face without flinching at sudden movements. The thought was fragile, but it gave her a small hope that things could change. She held on to that hope like a small flame against the dark. The days passed slowly, but each one brought her closer to understanding the limits of her life and the possibilities beyond it. She watched the town continue, as if nothing had changed. She saw the cowboy working quietly on his land, and felt a silent reassurance that there were people who moved through the world with calm and strength. She began to realize that she could learn from them, maybe find her own way to stand quietly, but firmly. Every movement she made became a practice in patience and observation. She learned to notice small details like the way the wind moved through the grass, or the way birds returned to the same trees each day. These small observations gave her a sense of order and a feeling that not everything was unpredictable. Even when fear crept in, she had reminders of the world beyond it and the possibility of protection, and strength that did not need to shout or strike. As the sun rose and set over the fields, she continued to watch and learn. The quiet of the town, the steady work of the cowboy, the patterns of life that repeated themselves day after day all became a part of her understanding. She realized that even in a world that sometimes seemed cruel, there were people who moved with integrity and calm. She held on to that realization and carried it with her as she navigated her own difficult life. By the time the day ended, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. She had moved through her life carefully and survived another day without incident. She had noticed the small gestures of kindness and strength around her and let them fill her mind with hope. And though the house still held tension, she had begun to feel that one day the fear might be replaced by quiet courage and that she might find a way to live without constantly bracing for the next threat. The next morning, the sky was pale with soft sunlight that spilled over the fields and into the town. She moved through her morning routine as usual, but there was a growing tension inside her that she could not ignore. The fear she felt yesterday did not fade with the night but lingered quietly in her chest. She washed the dishes slowly and looked out at the horizon where the cowboy was already at work with his horses. He seemed unaware of her gaze, yet there was a calm in the way he moved that made her heart beat a little slower. She did not know him well, but she felt a strange sense of safety. In his presence that she could not explain, her husband was up already, and his shadow filled the small kitchen as he moved about. He spoke little, but his eyes scanned the room in a way that made her nerves tighten. Even the smallest action could set him off, and she kept her movements careful. She poured water into a cup and carried it to the table, slowly measuring each step. Her hands trembled slightly, but she refused to show it. She had learned over the years that fear could be dangerous if seen. Outside, the town was stirring with its usual morning sounds. The blacksmith was hammering metal, and the sound echoed through the street. Children ran past, laughing and shouting, and women carried baskets filled with food. Life went on in its ordinary rhythm. But she felt the weight of every sound. Each bang and shout made her flinch, and she longed for a quiet moment. She looked toward the edge of town and saw the cowboy walking toward the barn. He nodded to a neighbor, and the neighbor nodded back. His movements were deliberate, calm, and full of strength. She could not stop watching, even though she knew she should focus on her own life. During the morning, she had to run an errand to the town store. She moved quickly and quietly through the streets, holding her basket tightly. Her husband had given her strict instructions not to speak to certain people, and she obeyed them carefully. Even as she moved, she felt the eyes of others on her. Some were curious, some were sympathetic, but she kept her face calm and carried herself with control. She noticed the cowboy again standing by the fence, and she felt a fleeting sense of relief. His presence was steady like a rock, and she drew a small measure of courage from it. The store was busy with townsfolk buying and selling small goods. She tried to focus on her task, but her mind kept drifting to the day ahead and the possibility of danger. A conversation between two men near the counter made her heart jump. They spoke quietly, but she caught the hint of aggression in their voices. She realized that her world could change in a moment without warning, and she tightened her grip on the basket. She moved to leave quickly, but careful not to make a sound. Her steps were measured and precise, and she felt relief as she finally stepped outside. Walking back home, she felt the wind on her face and allowed herself a small breath. The fields stretched wide, and the light of morning gave the world a soft glow. She remembered the cowboy at the edge of town and imagined him moving silently through the fields, watching and protecting without needing to intervene. The thought brought a strange comfort. She felt less alone in the tension that surrounded her. Arriving home, she found her husband in the usual chair reading a newspaper. He glanced at her once, but said nothing. The quiet was oppressive, and she felt the familiar fear rising. She moved to the kitchen and began preparing lunch. Every sound of movement was measured and every glance carefully placed. She had grown adept at navigating the household and at keeping her life invisible, yet she longed for something more. The fear was not constant, but it was always close. It's like a shadow that followed her. After lunch, she went to the porch with a small book in hand, but she did not read. Instead, she looked out at the horizon and watched the cowboy moving among the horses. He was alone and focused, but she felt a connection to his calm presence. She wondered about the life he led, about the quiet strength it must take to move through the world with restraint and patience. She imagined what it would feel like to have that same power within herself to face danger without fear and to act with confidence. The afternoon passed slowly, and the tension in the house never lessened. Her husband moved from one task to another without speaking, and she followed the rhythm of the household without error. She prepared dinner early and moved carefully through the rooms as the sun began to set. Outside, the light softened, and the wind carried the scent of the fields into the house. She paused on the porch to watch the sky turn gold and pink. The beauty of the evening was almost painful against the constant stress she felt. She wished she could live in that calm instead of the constant vigilance required in her home. That evening she heard a knock at the door. She froze, but it was only a neighbor delivering some bread. The interaction was brief and polite, and she thanked the neighbor quietly before returning inside. The small moment reminded her that not all encounters brought danger. There were small acts of kindness that she could hold on to as reminders that the world was not entirely harsh. She thought again of the cowboy and the calm strength he showed without speaking. She realized that there were people who could face challenges with quiet power, and she could learn from that example. Night came slowly, and the house settled into the usual silence. She lay in bed, listening to the wind move through the cracks in the walls. Her heart was heavy, but she felt a faint hope that one day things could change. She thought about the courage it would take to step beyond fear and to live in the open air of freedom. The cowboy's presence in the town had become a symbol of that courage for her. She did not know him well, but the small glimpses of his strength inspired her to consider that she, too, could find her own way to live without constant fear. The night was long, and she turned over her thoughts again and again. Each day had lessons, even in its fear. She learned how to move carefully, how to read moods, and how to survive with patience. She also began to notice moments of calm that existed outside her own fear, and she held on to them. She began to imagine what it might be like to act with confidence and to protect herself without needing others to intervene. Yet even with these thoughts, she felt the weight of reality pressing down. The journey ahead would require courage and careful planning. She had no illusions about that. By morning, she rose again with the knowledge that she must continue her careful dance through life. She moved through her routine with attention and focus. She thought about the days ahead and the possibilities that might open up if she could act wisely and stay safe. Each step was part of a larger pattern, and she began to realize that planning and patience were her allies. The cowboy's quiet presence continued to inspire her, even though he remained at a distance. The world was dangerous, but she began to understand that there were paths to navigate it safely and perhaps even to find moments of calm and freedom in the midst of it. All through the day she observed the small signs of life around her. Children played and learned and grew. Farmers worked the fields and returned home tired but satisfied. The sun moved across the sky, and the wind shifted through the trees. These rhythms reminded her that life continued outside her personal fear, and that strength came in many forms. She began to recognize the difference between those who acted with violence and those who moved with quiet determination. The cowboy had become an example of the latter, and she held that example. Close as she made her way through another day filled with both tension and possibility. The morning began with a quiet haze that lay over the town and fields. She moved carefully through her small home, arranging the simple things she had with attention and care. Her hands worked automatically, and her mind was elsewhere thinking about the day ahead. She had begun to understand that planning each step was important and that even small actions could have consequences. The fear she felt each day was still present, but now there was also a sense of determination growing quietly inside her. She realized she could not remain passive forever, and that her safety depended on careful choices and timing. That morning she left the house with a purpose. Her basket was light because she had only what was necessary, and she kept her movements deliberate. She walked through the streets of the town and felt the familiar eyes on her. Some people looked with curiosity and some with concern, but she ignored them. Her focus was on reaching the edge of the town where the fields began, and where the cowboy often tended his horses. He was there already, standing by the fence and watching the horses move slowly. She felt a surge of courage simply seeing him there. His calm presence seemed to say that strength did not have to be loud or violent, and that protection could exist without force. She hesitated at the edge of the field and looked back toward the town. Each step outside the safety of her home felt risky and yet necessary. She had decided that something had to change. The thought of staying trapped under her husband's anger no longer felt acceptable. She felt the weight of possibility pressing against her chest. She imagined what freedom might look like, and the thought made her heart race with a mixture of fear and hope. The cowboy noticed her hesitation and moved slightly closer to the fence, though he said nothing. His eyes followed her carefully, and he seemed to understand without words. She did not speak, but felt a quiet reassurance from his presence. For a moment, she imagined walking through the fields with him. Nearby, not because she needed a protector, but because his calm strength was something she could rely on. It was not a feeling of romance or attachment, but a recognition of the power of restraint and observation. She returned to the town briefly to gather some necessary items. She moved quickly but without panic, keeping her basket close. Her mind calculated each step carefully to avoid attention, and she kept her head low, though her heart was pounding. The store was crowded and the noise made her anxious, but she focused on the task and reminded herself that small, careful movements could carry her safely through the day. She noticed the small kindnesses of the shopkeepers, who greeted her politely and refrained from asking unnecessary questions. Each gesture of ordinary decency strengthened her resolve. Back on the path toward the fields, she felt the sun on her face and the wind moving through her hair. She allowed herself a deep breath and held it for a moment, savoring the simple sensation of freedom. The horizon stretched wide, and the space around her felt endless in comparison to the cramped house where fear had lived for so long. Each step was deliberate and careful, and she imagined the life she could lead if she found the courage to continue. The cowboy remained at the edge of the fields, watching silently. His presence was unassuming, yet full of authority, and she drew strength from it. She did not speak to him, but allowed herself to feel supported. She understood that he could act if danger came, but he would not act unless necessary. The restraint he showed was a lesson in power and responsibility. She felt her own courage grow quietly inside, her knowing that she did not have to face the world alone. As the afternoon passed, she planned her next moves carefully. She thought about the routes she could take through the town and the small gestures that might avoid drawing attention. Every detail mattered, from the timing of her departure to the way she carried herself. She considered the possibilities and the risks and began to form a plan. Her mind worked like a map, laying out each step and marking places where caution was needed. She understood that preparation was as important as courage. The evening came with a golden light that spread across the fields. She paused to watch the sky and felt a small joy in the colors that shifted slowly from gold to pink. The beauty of the world reminded her that life was larger than fear, and that even small moments could bring comfort. She imagined moving freely without fear, and her heart swelled with a quiet determination. The cowboy continued to tend the horses, and she watched him carefully. His movements were deliberate and calm, and she realized that he was teaching her an unspoken lesson in patience and careful strength. That night she returned home and prepared a simple meal. Her husband spoke little, and the silence was oppressive, but she kept her mind focused on the plan she was forming. She reviewed each step carefully and imagined herself moving through the world with caution and awareness. She realized that even small victories mattered, and that surviving the day without incident was itself an accomplishment. She thought about the cowboy again, and how he moved with quiet confidence. She understood that strength was not measured by violence, but by the ability to act with control and purpose. As she lay in bed, she thought about the days ahead and the courage she would need. She felt a strange sense of hope, mixed with the tension of fear. She imagined leaving the house and moving through the town with careful steps, knowing that someone was watching and that protection was possible without confrontation. The thought gave her a sense of reassurance, and she clung to it through the night. The next morning she rose with renewed determination. She moved through her routine with care and focus. Every action was measured and deliberate, and she reminded herself that planning and observation were as important as courage. She left the house with a light basket and a steady pace. The town looked ordinary, but she felt the weight of her plan pressing on her mind. She moved quickly yet carefully, and kept her eyes aware of the surroundings. Each step brought her closer to the freedom she sought, and farther from the fear she had lived with for so long. The cowboy watched from the edge of the field. His presence was steady and reassuring. She understood that he could intervene if necessary, but he waited silently. She felt a strange gratitude that was not spoken, and yet filled her heart. The quiet strength of his presence became a guide for her own courage. She imagined walking through the fields, with the sun on her face and the wind in her hair, and felt the power of careful determination building inside her. As the day moved forward, she observed the rhythm of the town and the movements of the people around her. Each detail mattered, and she took mental notes of the safest paths, the kindest faces, and the small opportunities that would help her reach her goal. She understood that fear was still present, but it no longer controlled her. Her plan was forming, and she felt the first real sense of control over her own life. By nightfall, she returned home and reviewed each step in her mind. She felt a growing sense of readiness and a quiet excitement at the possibilities ahead. The tension in the house remained, but she was learning to navigate it with patience and determination. She thought about the cowboy and the calm strength he showed. His presence had become a symbol of hope and protection, and she felt ready to take the careful actions necessary to move toward freedom and safety. The day began with a pale light spilling over the fields and streets. She woke with a sense of purpose and a quiet determination that had been growing inside her. The fear was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She moved through her home, carefully arranging the simple items she needed for the day. Each movement was deliberate, and each glance was measured. She had learned to observe every sound, every shadow, and every detail that might signal danger. Her mind worked constantly to plan the steps that could lead her to safety. As she stepped outside, she felt the cool air on her face and the sense of the wide-open fields around her. The town seemed ordinary to those who lived without fear, but to her every corner and every street held a potential risk. She kept her eyes alert and her steps measured. The cowboy was already at the edge of the fields, tending his horses. His movements were calm and steady, and she drew a sense of reassurance from his presence. She did not need to speak to him or acknowledge him directly. His quiet watchfulness gave her strength she had never felt before. She began walking through the town with her basket light and her mind focused on the plan she had formed. She avoided eye contact with unnecessary people and kept her pace deliberate. The store and the streets were filled with ordinary life, but she felt the weight of every moment. Each decision was important, and she thought carefully about the timing of her actions. She reviewed every detail in her mind and imagined the steps she would take if danger arose. She knew the moment of confrontation could come at any time, but she also knew she had allies she could not see directly. The cowboy followed her. From a distance, as she moved through the town, he did not call out or interfere, but his presence was a shield. He observed the streets, the people, and any possible threats. He understood the silent threat that followed her and acted with patience and caution. He did not rush, and he did not make himself obvious. His knowledge of the land and his strength made him a guardian without needing to raise his voice or his hand. She reached a quiet street where fewer people were present and paused to adjust the basket she carried. Her heart beat fast, but she focused on the rhythm of her steps and the patterns of the town around her. She imagined each path she could take and evaluated each one carefully. She understood that courage without planning could be dangerous. Each decision was a small step toward freedom and safety. In the afternoon, the sun warmed the streets, and she felt a mixture of fear and hope. She remembered the lessons she had learned from observing the cowboy. Strength could be quiet, and protection could exist without aggression. She held on to these lessons as she moved through the town and imagined the life that could await her if she acted with patience and care. The wind carried the sounds of the town and the fields beyond, and she felt a small sense of connection to the larger world. Her husband was home, and the tension in the house was palpable. He spoke little, but his eyes scanned the room constantly. She moved carefully, preparing meals and arranging her surroundings with precision. She understood that one misstep could trigger anger, and she focused on maintaining control over her own actions. The fear was present, but it no longer consumed her. She had learned to channel it into careful observation and thoughtful planning late in the afternoon. She took a moment on the porch to breathe and look at the horizon. The cowboy was tending his horses, and she felt the reassurance of his quiet presence. She imagined walking through the fields with him nearby. He did not speak, but the calm strength he exuded was enough to guide her imagination and inspire her courage. She understood that she could not rely entirely on another person, but the example he set showed her the power of patience and restraint. As night approached, she reviewed the plan she had formed. She imagined the steps she would take if she needed to leave quickly and carefully. Each possibility was mapped in her mind, and each risk was evaluated. She understood the importance of timing, observation, and careful action. The quiet strength of the cowboy had taught her that power was not in confrontation but in readiness and awareness. She felt her own courage growing quietly inside her. She lay in bed listening to the wind move through the cracks in the walls and the distant sounds of the town. The fear was still present, but it was tempered by the sense of preparation and the lessons she had learned from observing quiet strength. She imagined the path ahead and felt a mixture of hope and tension. She understood that the journey would not be easy, but it was possible if she acted with care and courage. The next morning, she rose early with renewed determination. She moved through her home with attention and focus. Every movement was deliberate, and each glance was measured. She reminded herself that the steps she took today could shape the days ahead. She left the house and felt the cool morning air on her face. The fields stretched wide and the town lay quiet in the morning light. The cowboy was already at the edge of the fields. He moved with calm authority, tending his horses and observing the land. She felt the reassurance of his presence and drew strength from it. She moved through the town with careful steps, her mind constantly planning and evaluating. Every detail mattered, and she paid attention to the rhythm of the streets, the gestures of the people around her, and the small signs that could indicate danger. She imagined the paths she could take and the opportunities that could lead her safely to freedom. She felt the tension of fear, but also the quiet excitement of possibility. The afternoon passed slowly but productively. She moved with deliberate care and observed every detail. She remembered the lessons from the cowboy and understood that protection and courage could exist without aggression. She allowed herself to imagine walking freely through the fields beyond the town and felt her own strength growing with each careful step. The planning and observation she practiced became a source of confidence. As night approached, She'd returned home and reviewed every step in her mind. She felt a growing sense of readiness and a quiet excitement at the possibilities ahead. She understood that courage alone was not enough, but that careful action, observation, and planning could make a difference. The tension in the house remained, but she was learning to navigate it with patience and strategy. She thought about the cowboy and the quiet strength he showed. His presence had become a symbol of hope and protection, and she felt ready to take the careful steps necessary to move toward freedom and safety. The morning was quiet and calm, with a soft light spreading across the town and fields. She woke with a sense of purpose and a steady determination that had been growing over the past days. The fear that had once consumed her was still present, but now it was tempered by careful planning and observation. She moved through her home, arranging the few items she needed for the day with deliberate care. Each movement was considered and every glance measured. Her mind worked to remember every detail and every possible risk in the path ahead. She stepped outside and felt the cool air on her face. The town appeared ordinary, but she knew that beneath the surface, each street and corner could hold danger. Her basket was light, and she held it close as she walked with careful, deliberate steps. The cowboy was already at the edge of the fields, tending to his horses. He moved slowly and calmly, his presence reassuring. She did not speak to him or acknowledge him directly, but she felt a sense of safety simply knowing he was there. His quiet strength was a reminder that protection did not always require confrontation, and that courage could exist without aggression. As she moved through the town, she felt the weight of her decision pressing on her. She had begun to understand that leaving the house and moving toward freedom would require careful planning and careful action. Each step mattered, and she calculated them with precision. The market was busy, and the sounds of conversation and movement made her nervous. She kept her pace steady, avoided eye contact where necessary, and focused on the plan she had formed. She reminded herself that courage, without caution, could be dangerous. Her careful movements, attention to detail, and awareness of her surroundings were as important as her desire for freedom. The cowboy followed at a distance, his eyes scanning the streets and the people around them. He did not speak or act, but his watchfulness created an invisible shield of safety. He understood the danger that followed her and moved with patience and control. His calm presence gave her the reassurance she needed to take each step forward. She knew that he could intervene if necessary, but his restraint showed her the power of careful observation and measured action. By midday, she reached a quieter street and paused to adjust her basket and check her surroundings. Her heart beat quickly, but she focused on controlling her breathing and maintaining steady steps. The sun warmed the streets, and the town seemed still for a moment. She felt the tension of fear pressing against her chest, but it was balanced by the growing sense of possibility. She imagined the freedom of the fields and the quiet safety that awaited her beyond the town. Each small step was a victory over fear and a movement toward a new life. She planned each move carefully and considered every possibility. The streets, the people, and the timing of her actions were all calculated. She knew that one misstep could bring danger, but she also knew that preparation and awareness could guide her safely through the day. Her mind replayed each route and imagined the safest path to freedom. She felt the lessons from observing the cowboy guiding her choices. His calm strength and careful observation taught her the power of patience and the importance of readiness. In the afternoon, she moved toward the fields, leaving the crowded streets behind. The open space gave her a sense of relief and a quiet exhilaration. The wind moved through the grass, and the horizon stretched wide. She allowed herself a deep breath and felt the tension ease slightly. Each step through the fields felt like a small triumph. The cowboy followed silently at a distance, his watchful eyes ensuring that no threat approached. She felt the protection of his presence and allowed herself to imagine the freedom of a life without fear. Evening approached, and the sky turned golden. She paused to look at the horizon and felt a small sense of joy. The world was larger than the fear she had lived with, and she realized that courage was not just about facing danger, but about acting with awareness and patience. She thought about the life that could be hers if she continued to move carefully and thoughtfully. The lessons she had learned from observing the cowboy became part of her own strength. She understood that quiet courage and careful planning could guide her safely toward freedom. As night fell, she found a safe place to rest and reflected on the journey she had begun. The fear was still present, but it was tempered by hope and careful preparation. She realized that her courage had grown through observation, planning, and careful action. The cowboy had remained a silent guide and protector throughout her day. She did not need words to understand his presence. It had been a lesson in restraint, patience, and quiet strength. She lay down and thought about the steps she would take tomorrow. Each moment had taught her the importance of careful movement and careful decision-making. The fear was part of her life, but it no longer controlled her. She understood that freedom required courage and planning, and that quiet strength could provide protection even in the face of danger. She imagined walking through the fields, the sun on her face, and the wind moving through her hair, and felt a sense of hope that had been absent for too long. The next morning she rose with renewed determination and careful attention to each step she took. Her home was quiet, and she moved with deliberate care. She reminded herself that her actions could shape the days ahead. Stepping outside, the fields stretched wide, and the town lay still in the morning light. The cowboy was already there, tending his horses with calm authority. His silent presence continued to provide reassurance and strength. She drew courage from it and felt her own power growing quietly within her. She moved through the town with deliberate care, her eyes alert and her mind focused on the plan. Each detail mattered, from the movement of the townspeople to the rhythm of the streets and the timing of her own steps. She imagined the path to freedom and felt the tension of fear mixed with the excitement of possibility. The careful observation and planning that had become part of her routine guided her. Through each moment, by midday she had reached the edge of the town and stepped into the open fields. The sense of space and freedom was almost overwhelming. She allowed herself to breathe deeply and felt a quiet exhilaration. The cowboy followed silently, his watchful presence a constant reminder of restraint and quiet power. She moved with a sense of control and confidence, understanding that courage could exist without aggression. Each step through the fields was a small victory over fear and a movement toward the life she had longed for. As the sun began to set, she paused to look at the horizon. The golden light stretched across the fields and the town behind her. She felt the relief of being one step closer to freedom. The quiet lessons of observation, planning, and restraint had guided her safely through the day. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about acting wisely and carefully. The cowboy remained at a distance, a symbol of strength and protection. She felt gratitude and inspiration from his example. Night fell, and she settled in a safe place, reflecting on the journey she had taken. The fear that had once controlled her life was still present, but now it was tempered by careful planning, awareness, and the quiet strength she had learned from observing the cowboy. She imagined the days ahead and felt a sense of hope and possibility. She understood that freedom was within reach and that courage, patience, and careful action could guide her safely to a life beyond fear. She lay down feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation for the new life that waited her. The morning was calm and filled with soft light that spilled over the fields and streets of the town. She woke with a quiet determination that had grown steadily in recent days. The fear that had once controlled her life was still there, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. She moved carefully through her home, organizing the few items she needed for the day with attention and care. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured. Her mind worked to review the plan she had formed and to prepare for the journey ahead. Stepping outside, she felt the cool morning air and the vastness of the open fields beyond the town. The streets looked ordinary, but she knew that danger could appear at any corner. Her basket was light and held close as she moved with a steady pace. The cowboy was at the edge of the fields tending his horses. His calm and deliberate movements gave her a sense of reassurance and strength. She did not speak or make any gesture toward him, but she felt a quiet comfort in his presence. His strength was not loud or aggressive, but it was protective and steady, and it reminded her that courage could be quiet. As she walked through the town, she remained alert, observing the movements of people and noting the rhythm of the streets. Her mind calculated each step carefully, aware that every action mattered. She avoided unnecessary attention and focused on moving with precision. The market was busy with merchants and townsfolk, but she kept her head low and her pace steady. She reminded herself that courage alone was not enough and that careful planning and awareness were crucial. Each moment became a small test of her resolve and her patience. The cowboy followed at a distance, his eyes scanning for any potential danger. He remained silent and unobtrusive, acting as a guardian without drawing attention. His watchful presence gave her a sense of security, though she knew she could not rely solely on him. The lesson he had shown through his calm restraint was that strength could be protective without needing to be aggressive. She felt that same calm strength beginning to grow within her. By midday, she reached a quieter area of the town and paused to rest for a moment. Her heart beat fast, but her breathing remained steady. The sun warmed the streets, and the gentle movement of the wind through the trees brought a fleeting sense of peace. She reflected on how far she had come since the days when fear dictated every decision. Now she moved with awareness and intention. Each step was a deliberate act toward freedom and safety. The afternoon brought more challenges as she navigated streets where people lingered and conversations flowed. She moved carefully, listening for any hint of danger and keeping her mind focused on the plan she had formed. Each decision required thought and attention, and she welcomed the growing sense of control over her own life. The lessons she had absorbed from observing the cowboy guided her movements. Strength could be calm, courage could be measured. And protection did not always require confrontation. She finally reached the edge of town and stepped into the open fields. The space around her was vast and open, giving her a sense of liberation. She allowed herself to breathe deeply, feeling the tension in her chest ease slightly. Each step through the grass felt like a small victory. The cowboy followed at a respectful distance, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She felt the reassurance of his presence without needing to acknowledge it. His watchfulness gave her confidence to move forward with care and determination. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the fields with warm golden light, she paused to rest and take in the view. The town lay behind her, and the horizon stretched endlessly before her. She felt a mixture of relief, hope, and anticipation. Each step she had taken so far had been guided by careful planning, awareness, and quiet courage. She realized that freedom required more than bravery. It required thoughtfulness, patience, and the strength to move deliberately. Evening settled over the fields, and she found a safe place to rest. The cowboy stayed at a distance, a silent guardian who had shown her the power of restraint and patience. She reflected on the lessons she had learned. Courage could exist without aggression. Protection could be offered without force, and even small, careful steps could lead to meaningful change. She understood that the journey ahead would still require vigilance, but she now carried the tools and inner strength to navigate it successfully. Night fell, and she settled in to rest, her mind replaying the day's careful steps. Each movement she had made was deliberate, each decision a quiet act of courage. The fear she had lived with was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She could see a path forward, a way to continue moving toward freedom and safety. The cowboy's silent presence remained a symbol of strength, patience, and quiet protection. She felt inspired by it and knew that she could carry those lessons within herself as she moved forward. The next morning she rose early with renewed focus. She moved with care through her home, reviewing the plan for the day and ensuring she had everything she needed. Stepping outside, she felt the cool morning air and the expanse of fields stretching ahead. Her steps were deliberate and measured as she moved through the town. Always aware of her surroundings and mindful of the risks, she felt the quiet reassurance of the cowboy's presence at the edge of the fields, reminding her of the lessons she had learned throughout the day. She navigated streets, alleys, and open areas with careful attention. She observed the people around her, noting gestures, movements, and patterns. She acted with patience, avoiding unnecessary attention, and made every decision with thoughtfulness. Each successful step through the town reinforced her growing confidence and sense of control. She understood that freedom required vigilance, careful planning, and courage, but also patience and quiet strength. By afternoon, she reached a part of the fields that stretched farther than she had ever gone. She paused to take in the view, feeling a sense of liberation she had not known before. The wind moved through the tall grass, and the sun cast a warm glow across the landscape. She felt the tension of fear lessen with each deliberate step she took. The cowboy remained at a distance, his calm presence a reminder of the power of restraint and observation. She carried that lesson within herself as she moved steadily forward. Each step a quiet act of courage. As the day ended and the sun set, she found a safe spot to rest. The town lay behind her, and the fields stretched endlessly ahead. She reflected on the journey she had taken, the careful planning, observation, and quiet courage that had brought her to this moment. The fear she had once felt was still present, but now it was tempered by hope, preparation, and inner strength. She knew that freedom and safety were within reach, and that the lessons she had learned would guide her through whatever came next. Night fell completely, and she lay quietly in the open, feeling the vastness of the world around her. The cowboy remained at a distance, a silent protector who had shown her that courage and strength could exist without aggression. She felt gratitude for his example and inspiration from the quiet strength he represented. She understood that her journey was not over, but that she now had the tools, the courage, and the careful planning necessary to continue moving toward a life of freedom and safety. She closed her eyes with a sense of accomplishment, hope, and anticipation for the days ahead, ready to face whatever challenges might come with quiet determination and steady courage.